I am not going to repeat myself. You are a security risk, and you are disturbing the elite passengers of this cabin. Get your bag, get up, and get to the back row now, or I will have the federal air marshals drag you off this plane in handcuffs. Do you hear me, boy? Move! A terrified black teenager freezing in a plush first-class seat, tears welling in his eyes as a crowded plane watches in silence. He had the ticket. He had the right. But he didn't have the look she wanted. She thought she was cleaning up the cabin. She didn't know she was waking up a sleeping giant. The air inside the Sovereign Air Boeing 566-303ER smelled of expensive leather, recycled oxygen, and the distinct, crisp scent of pre-departure champagne. It was a smell Callum Ravensworth had only ever imagined, a sensory detail he had read about in magazines but never experienced firsthand. At 17 years old, Callum was a prodigy of patience and hard work, a scholarship student who had spent the last 3 years keeping his head down, his grades up, and his cello practice strictly between the hours of 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. to avoid disturbing the neighbors. Today was the payoff. The Juilliard acceptance letter was folded neatly in his backpack, but this trip, this flight from JFK to London Heathrow, was his father's gift. A congratulations that had cost more than their first car. Callum adjusted the sleeves of his hoodie. It was a clean, slate-gray hoodie from a boutique brand paired with pressed chinos, but as he stepped across the threshold of the aircraft, he felt the heavy, invisible cloak of imposter syndrome settle over his shoulders. He glanced at his boarding pass. Seat 1A. The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of soft lighting and hushed tones. The seats weren't seats, they were suites, complete with privacy doors, lie-flat capabilities, and screens larger than the television in Callum's living room. He hesitated in the aisle, gripping the handle of his carry-on so tightly his knuckles turned the color of ash. "Can I see your ticket?" The voice was not welcoming. It was sharp, clipped, and devoid of the professional warmth Sovereign Air promised in its commercials. Callum looked up. Standing before him, blocking the entrance to the 1A suite, was Tessa Vaughn. She was a senior flight attendant, indicated by the gold striping on her uniform scarf, with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her eyes into a permanent squint of suspicion. She stood with a rigid posture, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. "Oh, yes, ma'am," Callum said, his voice cracking slightly. He hated that it cracked. He held out the paper pass, his hand trembling just a fraction. Tessa didn't take it. She just stared at it, then at him, then back at the pass. Her gaze lingered on his sneakers, expensive Jordans, a gift from his uncle, and then panned up to his hoodie. "This is the first-class cabin," Tessa said slowly, enunciating every syllable as if speaking to a toddler or someone who didn't understand English. "Economy is through the galley, past the lavatories, and all the way back." "I know," Callum said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm in 1A. My dad booked it." Tessa let out a short, incredulous puff of air through her nose. She finally snatched the boarding pass from his hand, her manicured nails grazing his skin with cold indifference. She tapped furiously on her tablet, her eyes darting between the screen and the boy. "Ravensworth," she asked, the name sounding foreign and distasteful in her mouth. "Yes, ma'am. Callum Ravensworth." "Wait here." She didn't invite him to sit. She didn't offer to take his coat. She turned her back on him, walking toward the galley where another flight attendant, Briar Langston, was organizing welcome drinks. Callum stood awkwardly in the aisle. Passengers were beginning to board behind him. Businessmen in charcoal suits, a famous influencer named Celine Hayes, who was already live-streaming her arrival, and an elderly couple dripping in pearls. They had to squeeze past Callum. "Excuse me," a man grunted, brushing past Callum's shoulder with a heavy briefcase. "Sorry," Callum whispered, shrinking into himself. "Sorry." He could hear Tessa whispering loudly to Briar in the galley. I don't care what the system says, Briar. Look at him. It's a glitch. Or he stole the miles. We have Emerson Blackwell flying the jump seat today because the cockpit is full, and we have a wait list of platinum members. I am not having a kid in a hoodie ruining the aesthetic of the cabin before we even push back. Tessa, check the code. Briar's voice was softer, pleading. It's a full fare revenue ticket. Code F. He didn't even use miles. If he paid, he sits. It's fraudulent, Tessa snapped. I've seen this before. Stolen credit cards. They book last minute, hop on, and hope we don't notice until we're over the Atlantic. I'm not dealing with security at Heathrow. I'm handling this now. Callum felt the heat rise up his neck. He wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but the acoustics of the cabin were excellent. He felt the eyes of Celine Hayes on him. She had lowered her phone, her expression unreadable, watching the scene unfold. Tessa marched back, her face composed into a mask of fake regret. Mr. Ravensworth, she said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. There is a significant problem with your ticket. The credit card used to book this seat has been flagged for irregularities. Irregularities? Callum's heart hammered against his ribs. My dad paid for it. It's his Amex. He's meeting me here. He's on this flight too. Tessa raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. Is he? Well, he's not here right now, is he? And until the cardholder is present to verify the transaction, I cannot allow you to occupy a first-class suite. It's company policy. Fraud prevention. But he's coming, Callum pleaded, looking toward the boarding door. He just had to park the car. He'll be here any second. We are closing the doors in 10 minutes, Tessa lied. The flight wasn't due to leave for another 30. I cannot hold the flight for a phantom cardholder. You have 2 choices. You can deplane and sort this out with the gate agent, which means you will miss this flight and likely be investigated by airport police, or you can take an available seat in the main cabin. The main cabin? Economy, Tessa said, dropping the polite facade. Row 48 is open, the last row. Window. Take it or get off my plane. Callum looked at the empty one a suite. It looked like a throne he had been exiled from. He thought about his dad. Leonidas had told him to meet him on the plane. If Callum got off now, he'd miss his dad. He'd ruin the trip. He'd ruin the celebration. He was 17. He was scared. He didn't want trouble. I'll take the seat, Callum whispered. Good choice, Tessa said, handing him back his boarding pass with a scribbled correction on it. Briar, escort him to the back. Make sure he stays there. The walk from the front of the plane to the back of a Boeing 777 is a long journey. It is a journey through social stratification, a descent through the layers of class. For Callum, it felt like a walk to the gallows. Briar Langston walked a few steps ahead of him, her posture apologetic. She didn't look at him, perhaps out of shame for her supervisor's behavior, or perhaps because she feared Tessa was watching. As they passed through business class, heads turned. People looked at the hoodie. They looked at the young black man being escorted by a flight attendant. They didn't see a victim. They saw a perpetrator. He must have snuck in. He was causing a scene, probably drunk. The whispers were like little cuts. Callum kept his eyes on the floor, focusing on the blue patterns of the carpet. He clutched his backpack straps, his knuckles white. He felt a burning sensation behind his eyes, the prelude to tears he refused to shed. His father had taught him better. Never let them see you bleed, Cal. Tears are for the victory lap, not the battlefield. But this felt like a battlefield where he had been shot before he even drew his weapon. They passed through the premium economy curtains and into the main cabin. It was crowded, chaos. Families were shoving carry-ons into overhead bins, babies were crying, and the air was already warmer, stuffier. Excuse me coming through, Briar murmured, parting the sea of passengers. They kept walking. Row 20, row 30, row 40. The plane narrowed at the tail. The turbulence was always worse here. The noise of the engines was deafening. Finally, they reached the very last row, row 48. The seat, 48K didn't recline. It was pressed directly against the wall of the rear lavatory. The smell of chemical disinfectant was already wafting out. "Here," Breyer said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked around to ensure Tessa wasn't within earshot. She leaned in close. "I'm really sorry about this. She's having a bad month. If your dad comes, tell him to talk to the captain. Captain Blackwell is a good man. He won't stand for this." "Thank you," Callum said, his voice hollow. He wedged his body into the seat. His knees pressed against the plastic backing of the seat in front of him. He was tall, 6'2", just like his father. The space was agonizingly small. He put his backpack on his lap because there was no overhead bin space left. It was filled with the overflow from other rows. He pulled his phone out. No signal. He couldn't text his dad. Minutes ticked by. He watched the stream of passengers trickle to a halt. The humiliation settled in his stomach like cold lead. He had done everything right. He had the grades. He had the manners. He had the ticket. And yet he was back here by the toilets, treated like a criminal. Suddenly, the intercom clicked on. Tessa's voice, sugary sweet now, floated through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Sovereign Air Flight 109 service to London Heathrow. We are wrapping up boarding and will be pushing back shortly. For our first and business class passengers, pre-departure champagne is now being served." Callum closed his eyes and leaned his head against the cold plastic window. Back in first class, Tessa was in her element. She was fluffing the pillow for Celine Hayes. "Is everything comfortable for you, Ms. Hayes?" Tessa asked, beaming. Celine looked up from her phone. She had been recording. She had recorded the entire interaction with Callum. She hadn't posted it yet. She was waiting for the punchline. "I'm fine," Celine said coolly. "But I'm curious. That boy, the one you moved, was his ticket really invalid?" Tessa's smile faltered for a nanosecond before reassembling. "Oh, absolutely. Security issue. We have to be so careful these days. You can't just let anyone wander into premium cabins. It makes the other guests uneasy." "I see," Celine said, glancing at the empty 1A suite. "So who sits there now?" "We usually keep it open for crew rest," Tessa said smoothly. "Or if we have a VIP upgrade." Tessa walked away, feeling victorious. She had maintained the sanctity of her cabin. She checked the manifest again. Leonidas Vexley, Seat 1B. The name sounded Greek, probably some old money-shipping magnate. He hadn't boarded yet. If he didn't show up in 2 minutes, she'd give the seat to the pilot, Emerson Blackwell, who was currently deadheading in the cockpit jump seat. She checked her watch, 1 minute to door close. And then the heavy thud of footsteps on the jet bridge. Leonidas Vexley did not walk. He glided with the momentum of a man who owned the very ground beneath his feet. He swept into the aircraft just as the gate agent was preparing to retract the bridge. He was a striking figure, 6'3", built like a linebacker who had transitioned into a boardroom predator. His skin was a deep, rich mahogany, contrasted perfectly by a bespoke Savile Row suit in midnight blue. He wore no tie, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a sliver of skin that hinted at a relaxed confidence. But his eyes, amber and piercing, were anything but relaxed. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than a Honda Civic. He stepped into the first-class cabin, bringing with him a gust of cool air and an aura of absolute command. Tessa Vaughn looked up from the galley cart. Her eyes widened. This was a man of consequence. This was the kind of passenger she lived for. "Good evening, sir," Tessa practically purred, stepping forward to block his path to the aisle, offering a hot towel with tongs. "You made it just in time. Mr. Vexley, I presume?" "I am," Leonidas said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as velvet but heavy as iron. He didn't take the towel. His eyes immediately scanned the cabin. He looked at Seat 1B, his seat, then he looked at Seat 1A. Empty. Leonidas frowned. a micro-expression, barely there but terrifying in its intensity. He checked his watch. Callum was never late. Callum was the kind of kid who arrived at the movies 30 minutes early to get the popcorn. "My son," Leonidas said, his gaze locking onto Tessa. "Has he not boarded?" Tessa froze. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. "Son?" She looked at Leonidas, the expensive suit, the power, the articulation. She thought of the boy in the hoodie, the sneakers, the shyness. Oh, God. "Your son?" Tessa stammered. We had a passenger." "Callum," Leonidas said. "Callum Vexley Ravensworth. Seat 1A. He texted me he was on board 20 minutes ago." Leonidas stepped past her, moving toward 1A. He saw the empty seat. He saw the absence of the backpack. He turned back to Tessa, and the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Where is he?" Tessa's mind raced. She needed a lie. A good one. "Sir, there was a ticketing error. A double booking. The system flagged his pass as invalid." "Invalid?" Leonidas repeated the word as if tasting poison. "I purchased these tickets directly through the Centurion concierge. There is no invalid. Where is my son?" We had to reaccommodate him," Tessa said, her voice shrinking. "He's on the plane. He's just in a different seat." "Which seat?" Row 48, she whispered. Leonidas stared at her. "Row 48? It was the only seat available, sir. The flight is full." I tried to tell him. "You put a minor, holding a full-fare first-class ticket, in the last row of the plane next to the toilet?" Leonidas asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was dangerously quiet. Passengers were taking off their noise-canceling headphones. Celine Hayes had her phone up again, camera rolling. "It was policy," Tessa said, grasping for straws. "His attire, his demeanor, it didn't match the manifesto profile. We have to be vigilant." Leonidas laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "His demeanor? You mean his skin color? Or was it the hoodie?" "Sir, please lower your voice," Tessa said, trying to regain control. "You are disturbing the other passengers." "I haven't even begun to disturb them," Leonidas said. He turned around, ignoring his seat, and began walking down the aisle. He walked past the lie-flat beds. He walked past the business-class pods where people were sipping wine. He walked past the curtain into premium economy. He walked into the crowded, noisy main cabin. He was a giant in a suit walking through a sea of tired travelers. People stared. He ignored them. He walked with a singular purpose. He reached the back of the plane. There, wedged into the corner, knees against his chest, head against the window, was Callum. Callum looked up. He saw his dad. The relief that washed over the boy's face broke Leonidas's heart and then instantly forged it into a weapon of war. "Dad," Callum said, unbuckling his belt. "They said the card was fake. They said—" "I know what they said," Leonidas said, reaching out a hand. "Get your bag, Cal." "But she said if I move, the marshals—" "Let her call the marshals," Leonidas said, loud enough for the back 5 rows to hear. "In fact, I pray to God she calls the marshals. I'd love to get their badge numbers on the record, too." Callum grabbed his bag. He stood up, unfolding his tall frame. He looked at his father, and for the first time in an hour, he felt safe. Leonidas put an arm around his son's shoulder. He turned him around to face the long aisle leading back to the front. "We are going back to our seats," Leonidas announced. "Sir!" It was Briar, the junior attendant. She looked terrified. "Sir, you can't just— Flight attendants have authority over seating." Leonidas stopped. He looked at Briar, seeing the fear in her eyes. He softened slightly for her. "Young lady, I know you are following orders, but you are about to witness a very expensive lesson in civil rights law. I suggest you stay in the galley and make some tea." He walked Callum back through the plane. The walk of shame, was reversed. It was now a procession of fury. When they reached first class, Tessa was waiting. She had the pilot, Captain Emerson Blackwell, standing with her. Blackwell was a stern man with gray hair, looking annoyed at having been called out of the cockpit during pre-flight checks. "This is the man," Tessa said, pointing a shaking finger at Leonidas. "He's refusing crew instructions. He's endangering the flight." Captain Blackwell stepped forward, crossing his arms. "Sir, I'm Captain Blackwell. My flight attendant tells me you're causing a disturbance. I need you to take your assigned seat, and your son needs to return to his assigned seat in economy. If you continue to argue, I will have you both removed." Leonidas stopped. He looked at the captain. He looked at Tessa. He slowly reached into his suit jacket. Tessa flinched as if he were pulling a gun. Leonidas pulled out a sleek, black business card holder. He extracted a card and held it out to the captain. "Captain Blackwell," Leonidas said. "My name is Leonidas Vexley. I am a senior partner at Vexley, Sterling & Moore. I specialize in high-stakes litigation against corporate entities for violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and, more specifically, 49 U.S. Code Section 40,127, which prohibits discrimination against air travelers." The captain took the card. He looked at it. He looked at the name. He recognized the firm. Everyone knew Vexley, Sterling & Moore. They were the firm that had bankrupted a pharmaceutical giant last year. "You have two options, Captain," Leonidas continued, his voice echoing in the silent cabin. "Option A? You let my son sit in the seat I paid $6,000 for, and we fly to London. Option B? You remove us. If you choose option B, by the time your wheels touch the tarmac, I will have filed a temporary restraining order against this airline's operating license, and I will personally sue you, this flight attendant, and Sovereign Air for racial profiling, breach of contract, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And I won't settle. I will take your pension, Captain, and I will take her job." Leonidas paused, his eyes burning into Tessa's soul. "Choose carefully. Seconds count." The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a thunderclap, heavy with static and unspoken threats. Captain Emerson Blackwell stood in the aisle, the business card of Vexley, Sterling & Moore feeling like a burning coal in his hand. He looked at Leonidas Vexley. He saw a man who was not posturing, not bluffing, and certainly not afraid. He saw a man who had likely destroyed careers far more insulated than his own. Blackwell was a pilot, not a lawyer, but he knew enough about aviation law to know that denied boarding and involuntary downgrade regulations were strict. He also knew that if this went viral, and he could see the phone of the woman in 3A, Celine Hayes, pointed directly at them, Sovereign Air would hang him out to dry to save their stock price. Blackwell let out a slow exhale. He turned to Tessa. "Ms. Vaughn," the captain said, his voice low and devoid of warmth. Tessa straightened up, expecting the order to remove the passengers. She had her hand on her hip, ready to wave the security team down the jet bridge. "Yes, Captain? Shall I call the gate agent?" "No," Blackwell said. He handed the card back to Leonidas with a stiff nod. "You will prepare the cabin for departure. Mr. Vexley and his son will be taking their assigned seats, 1A and 1B. Tessa's jaw unhinged. She looked at the captain as if he had just spoken in tongues. "Captain, you can't be serious. The boy, he's a disruption. He's already been moved. We can't just—" "I gave you an order, Tessa," Blackwell snapped, his patience evaporating. "The manifest shows 2 paid first-class passengers. Seat them, now." He turned back to Leonidas. "My apologies for the confusion, Mr. Vexley. We will be underway shortly. I trust there will be no further issues?" "That depends entirely on your crew, Captain," Leonidas replied, pocketing his card. "I am simply here to fly." Blackwell nodded once more, turned on his heel, and disappeared back into the cockpit, slamming the heavy reinforced door behind him. Leonidas didn't look at Tessa. He placed a hand on Callum's shoulder. "Sit, son. 1A. It's the window." Callum moved past Tessa. He could smell her perfume, something floral and cloying, and he could feel the heat of her rage radiating off her. She didn't move out of the way. She stood her ground until the very last second, forcing Callum to squeeze past her, his backpack brushing her arm. "Watch it," she hissed, audible only to him. Callum didn't respond. He sank into the seat. It was soft, enveloping him like a cloud. It was a world away from the rigid plastic of row 48. He buckled the seatbelt, his hands still shaking slightly. Leonidas sat in 1B, right next to him. He opened his briefcase, took out a noise-canceling headset, and placed it on the console. He then turned his gaze to Tessa, who was standing in the galley, furiously typing on her link device. "Miss Vaughn?" Leonidas called out. Tessa froze. She plastered a smile on her face that looked more like a rictus of pain. She walked over. "Yes, sir?" "My son's coat," Leonidas said calmly. "You didn't offer to hang it. I believe that is standard service in this cabin." Tessa stared at him. The other passengers were watching. The elderly couple in row 2 was whispering. Selene Hayes was typing furiously on her phone. "Of course," Tessa said through gritted teeth. She took Callum's hoodie. She held it with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated with radioactive waste, and marched it to the coat closet. She shoved it in, slamming the door with unnecessary force. "Thank you," Leonidas said, opening a file on his lap. "We're ready for takeoff." As the plane pushed back from the gate, the safety video began to play. Callum looked out the window at the tarmac of JFK, the lights blurring as the rain began to fall. He felt a tear slide down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, hoping his dad hadn't seen. But Leonidas saw everything. He reached across the console and squeezed Callum's forearm. "Head up, Cal," he whispered. "You belong here. Don't let her convince you otherwise. Not for a second." The seatbelt sign pinged off as Sovereign Air Flight 109 reached cruising altitude. The cabin came alive with the soft hum of activity. In first class, this meant the clinking of crystal and the rustle of hot linens. But for seats 1A and 1B, the atmosphere was Arctic. Tessa Vaughn was a veteran of the skies. She knew how to make a passenger's life miserable without technically breaking any rules. It was an art form she had perfected over 20 years. She couldn't kick them off now, but she could make them wish they had never boarded. She began the dinner service. She started with 2A and 2B, the elderly couple. She chatted with them about their grandchildren, laughing loudly, pouring them vintage Dom Perignon. Then she moved to 3A, Selene Hayes, fawning over her follower count, and offering her extra caviar. Then she bypassed row 1 completely. She went to the galley, busied herself with the coffee machine, and then returned to refill the elderly couple's glasses. Callum was hungry. He hadn't eaten since lunch. He watched the other passengers unfolding their napkins and receiving warm bowls of roasted nuts and marinated olives. "Dad," Callum whispered, "I think she's skipping us." Leonidas didn't look up from his legal pad. He was writing a detailed timeline of events. "She is attempting a constructive refusal of service. It's petty, and it's foolish. Should we say something?" "No," Leonidas said. "We wait. Let her dig the hole deeper." 10 minutes passed. Tessa walked past them again, eyes fixed firmly on the overhead bins. "Excuse me," Leonidas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the cabin noise like a knife. Tessa stopped. She didn't turn her body, just her head. "Yes?" "We haven't received menus," Leonidas said. "Or water." "Oh," Tessa said, feigning surprise. "My apologies. We're short-staffed today. I'm doing the best I can. I'll get to you when I can." "You've served every other row twice," Leonidas noted dryly. "They have higher loyalty status," Tessa lied smoothly. Sovereign Air prioritizes global services members. I'm sure you understand." She walked away before he could respond. In the galley, Briar Langston was preparing the meal trays. She looked anxious. "Tessa, you have to feed them. You can't just starve them. That's a violation of basic service standards." "I'm not starving them," Tessa snapped, grabbing a bottle of cheap sparkling water usually reserved for economy. "I'm prioritizing. Besides, I checked the inventory. We're short on the beef. Save the last 2 portions for the pilots. If those 2 want to eat, they can have the vegan pasta." "But the pilots have their own crew meals," Briar argued. "We have plenty of beef." "Do not question me, Briar," Tessa hissed, her eyes manic. "I am the purser. You are the junior. You do what I say. Give them the pasta, and give it to them cold. Tell them the oven is acting up." Briar looked at the trays. She looked at the curtains separating them from the passengers. She felt a knot of guilt in her stomach. She knew who Leonidas Vexley was. She had Googled him during takeoff. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the lawyer, the corporate killer. Briar took the trays. She heated them properly. She plated the beef tenderloin, the best cut, and garnished it perfectly. She walked out into the cabin, bypassing Tessa, who was busy gossiping with the influencer. Briar placed the tray in front of Callum. "Beef tenderloin with truffle mash, sir. And for you, Mr. Vexley." Callum looked at the food. It smelled incredible. He looked up at Briar. Her hands were shaking. "Thank you," Callum said softly. "I brought you some sparkling cider, too," Briar whispered, placing a glass down. "I'm sorry about everything." Before she could leave, Tessa intercepted her. She saw the beef. She saw the service. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She marched over to the table. "Briar, I told you that meal was reserved." "The pilots have their meals, Tessa," Briar said, her voice trembling but firm. "These passengers paid for first-class dining." Tessa glared at Briar, marking her for punishment later. She turned to Leonidas. "I hope you enjoy it. It's the last of it." "It looks delicious," Leonidas said, picking up his fork. "And Ms. Langston, thank you. Your professionalism has been noted, as has the lack thereof elsewhere." Tessa's face turned a blotchy red. She spun around and stormed back to the galley. She ripped the curtains shut. Inside the galley, she paced. She was losing control. The junior was rebelling. The passengers were mocking her. The captain had sidelined her. She felt the walls closing in. She needed to regain the upper hand. She needed to change the narrative. She looked at the liquor cart. She looked at the passenger manifest on her tablet. She saw the notes section. Passenger 1A minor. A plan began to form in her mind. It was dangerous, it was malicious, and it was desperate. But Tessa Vaughn was not a woman who went down without a fight. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin was dark. Most passengers were asleep. The only light came from the blue glow of the mood lighting and the screen of Celine Hayes's phone. Leonidas had finally put his work away and was reclining, eyes closed. Callum was watching a movie, his headphones on, trying to lose himself in the story and forget the woman who hated him a few feet away. Tessa was in the galley, ostensibly cleaning. In reality, she was setting a trap. She took a half-empty mini bottle of vodka from the cart. She wiped it down with a napkin to remove her prints, then wrapped it loosely in a cocktail napkin. She walked into the darkened cabin. She moved silently, like a phantom. She approached seat 1A. Callum was engrossed in his movie. His backpack was on the floor, slightly open. Tessa leaned over, pretending to collect a discarded water bottle from the floor. As she did, she deftly slid the vodka bottle into the side pocket of Callum's backpack. It was a sleight of hand she had practiced years ago when she used to confiscate duty-free liquor for her own parties. She straightened up, checked to see if anyone had seen. The cabin was asleep. Leonidas was breathing deeply, rhythmically. Tessa returned to the galley. She waited 10 minutes. Then, She hit the call button for the cockpit. "Flight deck," Captain Blackwell's voice crackled. "Captain, it's Tessa. I need you to come out here. We have a situation." "Can it wait? We're dealing with a headwind calculation." "No, Captain. It's a violation of federal aviation regulations, alcohol consumption by a minor, and, theft." There was a pause. "I'm coming out." Tessa stood tall. This was it. The zero-tolerance policy. If a minor was caught consuming stolen alcohol, the airline was required to report it. The police would meet the plane. The father would be humiliated. The boy would be detained. It would justify everything she had done, profiling him as a trouble risk. Captain Blackwell emerged from the cockpit, rubbing his eyes. "What is it?" "I was doing a cabin walk," Tessa whispered, her voice trembling with fake concern. "I saw the boy in 1A drinking. I think he raided the cart when we were in the galley. I checked the inventory. We're missing vodka." Blackwell frowned. "Are you sure?" "I saw him put the bottle in his bag," Tessa lied. "He's stumbling. He's intoxicated. It's a safety risk, Captain. If he gets aggressive—" Blackwell looked at the sleeping figures in row 1. "Wake them up." Tessa smiled internally. "Yes, Captain." She marched over to row 1 and shook Leonidas's shoulder. "Mr. Vexley, wake up." Leonidas woke instantly, his eyes snapping open. He saw the captain standing over him. "What is it? Is there an emergency?" "Sir, I need to inspect your son's bag," Captain Blackwell said sternly. Callum pulled his headphones off, confused. "What? Why?" "We have a report that you have stolen alcohol from the galley and have been consuming it," Blackwell said. "What?" Callum sat up, eyes wide. "No, I haven't left my seat except to pee. I didn't steal anything." "Then you won't mind if we look," Tessa said, her voice dripping with triumph. She reached down and grabbed the backpack before Callum could protest. "Hey!" Leonidas sat up, his voice booming. "Do not touch his property." "Federal regulations, Mr. Vexley," Blackwell said. "If we suspect a safety violation, we have the right to search carry-on luggage accessible in the cabin." Tessa unzipped the side pocket. She reached in. She pulled out the mini bottle of vodka. "Aha," she said, holding it up like a trophy. "Absolute, from our cart. And look," she twisted the cap. "It's open." The cabin woke up. Lights flickered on. Passengers craned their necks. "I didn't put that there," Callum cried, panic rising in his chest. "I swear, I don't even drink." "It was in your bag," Tessa said loudly. "Captain, we have theft and underage drinking. I want this documented. I want authorities on the ground." Leonidas looked at the bottle. He looked at Tessa. He looked at the angle of the bag. He stood up. He towered over Tessa. "Captain," Leonidas said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "you are being played." "The evidence is right there, sir," Blackwell said, though he looked uneasy. "It's a plant," Leonidas said. "She put it there." "That is a lie," Tessa shrieked. "How dare you? I am a senior crew member." "I didn't do it, Dad," Callum said, tears streaming down his face. "Please, you have to believe me." "I believe you, son," Leonidas said. He turned to the cabin. "Did anyone see this woman near my son's bag?" Silence. The passengers were groggy, confused. "I did." The voice came from seat 3A. Everyone turned. Celine Hayes was holding up her phone. She wasn't recording a selfie this time. She was playing back a video. "I was doing a time-lapse of the clouds," Celine said, her voice clear and cutting. "I set my phone up against the window about 20 minutes ago. It catches the reflection of the cabin." She held the phone out to the captain. On the small screen, in the reflection of the dark window, a ghostly figure could be seen bending down over seat 1A. The figure's hand clearly moved from their apron pocket to the backpack. "She planted it," Celine said, looking at Tessa with disgust. "I saw it on the playback just now." Tessa's face went white, a deathly, chalky white. Captain Blackwell took the phone. He watched the video. He watched it again. He looked up at Tessa. The look in his eyes was no longer annoyance. It was horror and fury. "Tessa!" Blackwell said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Go to the galley, sit on the jump seat, and do not say a single word. Do not move. Do not look at a passenger. You are relieved of duty immediately." "But, Captain," Tessa stammered, reaching out. "Now!" Blackwell roared, a sound that shook the bulkheads. Tessa flinched. She looked around the cabin. Every pair of eyes was on her. Disgust, judgment, hatred. She turned and stumbled toward the galley, her world collapsing around her. Leonidas looked at the captain. "Captain Blackwell, I believe you have a call to make to the authorities, but it's not for my son." Blackwell nodded grimly. "Yes, Mr. Vexley. I believe I do." The remainder of the flight across the Atlantic passed in a surreal, heavy silence. The cabin of Sovereign Air Flight 109 felt less like a luxury transport and more like a crime scene that hadn't yet been taped off. Tessa Vaughn sat on the jump seat in the rear galley, strapped in, her face a mask of crumbling plaster. She had been relieved of duty, the ultimate humiliation for a purser. Every time a junior flight attendant walked past her to grab water or a towel, they averted their eyes. She wasn't just a colleague anymore, she was a pariah. But Tessa's mind was still racing, spinning a web of defense. It was a misunderstanding, she told herself. The video is grainy. It's a reflection. I can say I was checking the bag for safety. I can say I found the bottle on the floor and was putting it back to secure it. They can't prove intent. I have 20 years of service. The Union will back me. She clung to these delusions as the plane began its descent into London Heathrow. Up in row 1, the mood was somber but solidified. Leonidas Vexley was no longer resting. He was working. He had connected to the onboard Wi-Fi and was already communicating with his London associates. He wasn't just preparing a complaint, he was preparing a warhead. "Dad," Callum whispered as the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud. "What happens when we land? Will the police be there?" "Yes," Leonidas said, closing his laptop. "But not for you, Cal. Never for you." The wheels touched the tarmac with a screech of rubber, and the reverse thrusters roared. As the plane taxied to the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It sounded tired. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have been asked by local authorities to hold the aircraft at the gate for a brief period. No one is to stand up until instructed." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. People checked their watches. They worried about connecting flights. The plane shuddered to a halt. The jet bridge connected, but the boarding door didn't open immediately. From his window seat, Callum saw 3 police cars with blue lights flashing on the tarmac below. He saw officers in high-visibility jackets ascending the stairs to the jet bridge. The cabin door opened. 3 officers from the Metropolitan Police boarded, accompanied by a severe-looking woman in a suit, a Sovereign Air Station manager. Captain Blackwell met them at the door. He spoke to the lead officer, gesturing toward the back of the plane, and then toward row 1. He handed the officer an evidence bag containing the mini bottle of vodka. Then he pointed to Celine Hayes in 3A. The officer nodded and walked down the aisle. He stopped at row 1. "Mr. Vexley?" the officer asked. He had a thick London accent. "I am," Leonidas said, unbuckling his belt. "We have received a report of an incident aboard the aircraft regarding an attempted framing of a minor and potential interference with flight crew duties. We've viewed the digital evidence sent ahead by the captain. We need a statement from you and your son, but you are not under suspicion." "Thank you, officer," Leonidas said. "We are fully cooperative." The officer turned and signaled his colleagues. "Bring her forward." The entire first-class cabin craned their necks. From the back of the plane, escorted by Briar Langston and another officer who had boarded from the rear, came Tessa. She wasn't wearing her blazer anymore. She looked small, stripped of her authority, but as she reached the front, She saw Leonidas and Callum, and a spark of her old venom returned. "This is ridiculous!" Tessa shouted, her voice shrill in the quiet cabin. "I am the victim here. That boy was aggressive. I was trying to protect the safety of this flight." "Ms. Vaughn," the station manager cut in, her voice like ice. "You are to remain silent. You are suspended pending an immediate investigation." "Suspended?" Tessa scoffed, looking at the police. "You're going to arrest me? For what? Doing my job? This man," she pointed a shaking finger at Leonidas, "threatened me. He used his status to intimidate the crew." "That's enough," the lead officer said. He stepped forward. "Tessa Vaughn, I am arresting you on suspicion of perverting the course of justice and interfering with the duties of a flight crew member under the Air Navigation Order. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." The handcuffs came out. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut was louder than the engines had been. Tessa gasped. The reality finally hit her. She looked at the passengers. She looked for support. She found none. She looked at Callum, the boy she had sent to the back, the boy she had tried to ruin. Callum looked back at her. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked disappointed. "Why?" Callum asked softly. "I just wanted to go to school." Tessa didn't have an answer. She was led off the plane, head bowed, past the first-class suites she had ruled like a tyrant for a decade. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, Celine Hayes lifted her phone one last time. "Liv from Heathrow," Celine whispered to her 2 million followers. "Karma just landed." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind that changed the landscape of sovereign air forever. The video Celine Hayes posted didn't just go viral, it went nuclear. Within 3 hours of landing, it had 10 million views. The hashtags #Sovereign Air Racism and #Justice for Callum were trending #1 globally. Sovereign Air's stock price dipped 4% before the London Stock Exchange even closed. But the real damage, the hard karma, was happening in a conference room in central London. Leonidas Vexley didn't go to the hotel to sleep. He went to the Sovereign Air corporate headquarters, accompanied by 2 partners from his firm's London branch. He sat across from the Vice President of Customer Experience and the airline's General Counsel. The General Counsel, a man named Sterling, no relation to Leonidas's partner, looked exhausted. He had seen the video. He had seen the police report. He knew there was no defense. "Mr. Vexley," Sterling began, "we are prepared to offer a significant settlement. We will refund the tickets, obviously. We will offer a cash compensation of £50,000, and we will issue a public apology." Leonidas sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at the VP, then at the lawyer. 50,000? Leonidas repeated the number as if it were a joke. "You think the dignity of my son is worth the price of a mid-range sedan?" "It's a standard high-tier offer," Sterling said. "This was not a standard incident," Leonidas said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register. "This was a premeditated attempt by your senior employee to frame a black teenager for a federal crime. If that video didn't exist, my son would be in a cell right now. He would have a record. His scholarship to Juilliard would be revoked. His life would be over." Leonidas leaned forward. "I am not here for £50,000. I am here for structural change, and I am here to ensure Ms. Vaughn never works in a service industry again." "We have already fired her," the VP said quickly, "effective immediately, without severance." "Good," Leonidas said. "Now, here are my terms. You will pay my son $5 million in damages for defamation, emotional distress, and civil rights violations. You will donate an additional $5 million to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. You will institute mandatory third-party anti-bias training for every single flight crew member in your fleet, and the curriculum will be approved by my firm. And Leonidas paused. You will release a statement detailing exactly what she did. No regrettable incident euphemisms. You will admit that your employee attempted to frame a child. You will own it. Sterling paled. 5 million? That's unprecedented. Try me in court, Leonidas said, standing up. I'll ask the jury for 50. The room went silent. The executives exchanged looks. They thought about the trending hashtags. They thought about the boycott calls starting on Twitter. We will agree to the terms, Sterling whispered. Meanwhile, in a holding cell in Hillingdon, Tessa Vaughn sat on a hard bench. Her uniform was wrinkled. Her tights had a run in them. Her lawyer, a public defender provided by the state because the union had refused to represent her given the criminal nature of her actions, sat across from her. It's not looking good, Tessa, the lawyer said. The video is damning. The witness statements are consistent. The captain testified against you. Briar Langston testified against you. Briar is a traitor, Tessa spat. Briar is a witness, the lawyer corrected. Sovereign Air is pressing charges for the theft of the alcohol. The Crown Prosecution Service is charging you with perverting the course of justice. That carries a prison sentence. Prison? Tessa's voice cracked. I'm a flight attendant. I don't go to prison. You targeted a child, the lawyer said bluntly, and you got caught. The airline has cut you loose. Your pension is gone. Your reputation is gone. My advice? Plead guilty. Take the 2 years. If you fight this and Leonidas Vexley testifies, you'll get 5. Tessa put her head in her hands and wept. Not for Callum, but for the realization that her power, the petty kingdom she had built in the sky, was gone forever. 3 days later. Callum sat on a bench in Hyde Park. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were turning gold. He had his cello case next to him. He felt lighter. The weight of the flight, the fear that he didn't belong, had evaporated. His dad walked up, holding 2 coffees. Here, Leonidas said, handing one to Callum. Cappuccino, extra foam. Thanks, Dad. Leonidas sat down. He looked at his son. The settlement is signed. The money is going into a trust for you. You won't have to worry about tuition or rent or anything for a long time. I don't care about the money, Callum said. He looked at the swans drifting on the serpentine lake. I'm glad she can't do that to anyone else. She won't, Leonidas promised. She's facing charges. She'll never wear a uniform again. Leonidas took a sip of his coffee. I was proud of you up there, Cal. You kept your cool. You didn't give her the reaction she wanted. That takes strength. More strength than fighting. Callum smiled. I learned from the best. And the captain? Leonidas asked. Captain Blackwell sent a personal letter to the hotel this morning. He apologized for not intervening sooner. He's taking early retirement. He said he realized he had lost touch with what was happening in his own cabin. That's good, Callum said. And there's one more thing, Leonidas said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black envelope. What is this? Sovereign Air wants to make a gesture. They are flying us back to New York next week, but not on a commercial flight. Callum opened the envelope. It was an itinerary for a private charter. No more Tessa, Leonidas grinned. Just us. Callum laughed. It was a real full laugh, the kind that shook off the last remnants of the trauma. He reached for his cello case. Dad? Yeah? I think I'm ready to play now. Callum unzipped the case, took out the cello, and right there in the middle of Hyde Park, with the London skyline in the distance, he began to play. He played Bach. The notes floated up into the air, pure and defiant and beautiful. Passers-by stopped to listen. They didn't see a victim. They didn't see a suspect. They saw a young master at work. Leonidas watched his son, tears finally welling in his own eyes. They had tried to send him to the back. They had tried to silence him. But here he was, front and center, and the whole world was listening. We often hear that the customer is always right, but in the skies, The power dynamic is terrifyingly skewed. Tessa Vaughn thought her badge gave her the right to judge, sentence, and punish a young man based on nothing but his appearance. She thought she was untouchable. But she forgot one crucial rule of the universe. When you dig a grave for someone else, make sure you don't fall in yourself. Callum Ravensworth didn't just keep his seat, he kept his dignity. And Leonidas Vexley proved that a father's love, backed by a comprehensive knowledge of Title 49 of the U.S. Code, is the most dangerous force on Earth. If this story fired you up, if you believe in justice, served cold and karma served hard, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories with more people. Do you think the airline's punishment was enough? Or should the captain have faced charges too? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that bell. We have a story coming next week about a landlord who tried to evict a tenant, only to find out the tenant owned the building. You don't want to miss it. Stay safe, know your rights, and never let anyone send you to the back of the bus or the plane.